The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening, the kind of rain that makes you want to stay inside with a hot cup of tea and forget the world exists. But for Daniel Chen, there was no such luxury. He was standing in the garage looking at the bills scattered across the old wooden desk, trying to figure out which ones to pay first and which ones could wait another month. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, another thing that needed fixing but would have to wait. Everything seemed to need fixing these days. The garage had been his father's dream once, back when his mother was still alive and things felt possible. Now it was just a burden they both carried, trying to keep it alive like it was a living thing that might die if they stopped believing in it. Daniel was 24 years old, and sometimes he felt like he was 50. His hands were already rough and stained with oil that never quite washed out, no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd had different dreams once. Engineering school, a degree, maybe working for one of those big tech companies where people wore clean clothes and didn't have to worry about whether they could afford to fix the water heater. But life doesn't always care about your dreams. When his mom got sick 3 years ago, someone had to help his dad. And when she died, someone had to make sure his dad didn't die too, from the grief that seemed to hollow him out from the inside. So Daniel had come home, put away his textbooks, and picked up a wrench. He was just about to turn off the lights and call it a day when he heard it. The sound of a car engine coughing and sputtering, struggling like it was drowning. Then it went silent. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see a car coasting into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the downpour. Daniel grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The rain hit him immediately, cold and aggressive. The car that had pulled up wasn't the usual kind they saw at Chen's auto repair. It was one of those luxury sedans that cost more than his dad made in 3 years. Sleek, black, expensive. The kind of car that belonged in a showroom, not in their run-down parking lot with its cracked concrete and faded yellow lines. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a suit, the kind business people wear to important meetings, but it was already getting soaked. She had dark hair pulled back tight, and even in the rain, even with frustration written all over her face, she carried herself like someone who was used to being in control. "Are you still open?" she called out over the sound of the rain hammering on the metal roof of the garage. Daniel jogged over to her. "We were just closing, but what's the problem?" She pushed wet hair out of her face. "The engine just died. I was driving and it started making this clicking sound, then everything just shut off. I barely made it here." "Let me take a look," Daniel said, already moving toward the hood. "Pop it open for me." She reached inside and pulled the lever. Daniel lifted the hood and immediately got hit with a face full of rain. He didn't have an umbrella, didn't have a proper light, didn't have half the things he needed, but he'd learned to work with what he had. The woman came to stand beside him, getting even more soaked. "I have an important meeting downtown in 45 minutes. Is this something you can fix quickly?" Daniel played his flashlight across the engine. "Depends on what's wrong." "When did it start?" "About 10 minutes ago. Just clicking, then nothing." He checked the battery connections first, then the alternator. Everything looked fine on the surface, but something was definitely wrong. The clicking sound she described could be a lot of things. Starter motor, electrical system, fuel pump. Without proper diagnostic equipment, he was basically working blind. "I'll be honest with you," Daniel said, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. "This could take a while to figure out. And in this rain, it's even harder. Most places would tell you to come back tomorrow." Her face fell. "I can't miss this meeting. Do you know how much this deal is worth?" "I've been working on it for 6 months. Something in her voice got to him. It wasn't just frustration. It was desperation. The kind he recognized because he'd heard it in his own voice plenty of times. The desperation of someone who'd worked too hard for something to watch it slip away, because of bad luck and bad timing. "I didn't say I wouldn't try," Daniel said. "I'm just saying it might take a while, and I can't make promises." She looked at him for a long moment, rain streaming down both their faces. "Please, I'll pay extra." "Whatever you need," Daniel nodded. "Let me get my tools. You should wait inside where it's dry." "I'll help," she said. "You don't have to do that. You're already soaked. So are you. And it's my car. I want to see what's wrong with it." He almost smiled at that. Most people who drove cars like this didn't want to get their hands dirty. They just wanted things fixed, wanted problems to disappear without having to think about how or why. For the next 30 minutes, Daniel worked in the rain while she held the flashlight and asked questions. Smart questions, too. She wasn't just making conversation. She actually wanted to understand what he was looking for, what each component did, why he was checking one thing and not another. He tested the fuel pump first, disconnecting the line and checking for proper pressure. Working fine. Then he moved to the starter relay, pulling it out and testing it with his multimeter. Also fine. The battery was holding a charge. The alternator was generating power properly, but something in the distribution was off. He traced wire after wire, following the electrical pathways through the engine compartment, getting more soaked and more frustrated as the minutes ticked by. His father had taught him to be methodical. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume. Check everything systematically, even when you think you know what's wrong, especially when you think you know what's wrong. That's when you make mistakes. What's that component there? Helena asked, pointing to the alternator. That's what charges the battery while the engine runs, Daniel explained, wiping rain from his face. If that goes out, you might drive for a while on battery power alone, but eventually everything dies. But yours is working fine, and that? She pointed to another part. Starter motor. That's what actually turns the engine over when you turn the key. If that's bad, you usually hear a clicking sound, but the engine won't turn. But that's not your problem either. She was actually paying attention, nodding, following his explanations. Most customers just wanted to know how much and how long. They didn't care about the why. But she seemed genuinely interested, like she was filing away the information for future use. Your meeting, he said at one point. What time was it? She checked her watch and her shoulders sagged. 15 minutes ago. I'm sorry, not your fault. The car broke down, not you. She paused. Can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? You said you were closed. You could have just told me to call a tow truck. Daniel was elbow deep in the engine compartment, his fingers numb from the cold rain. My mom used to say that how you treat people when it's inconvenient says more about you than how you treat them when it's easy. I guess that stuck with me. There was silence except for the rain. Then she said quietly, Your mom sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Another 20 minutes passed. Daniel's back was aching. His clothes were completely soaked through, and he was starting to think he might actually have to give up when he found it. A corroded connection in the main electrical harness, hidden behind a cover panel. The corrosion was causing an intermittent short that was killing power to the entire system. Got it, he said. Really? What is it? He showed her, explaining in simple terms what had happened and what needed to be done. The fix itself wasn't complicated, but it required cleaning the connection, applying protective coating, and making sure everything was sealed properly so it wouldn't happen again. It took another 40 minutes. By the time he was done, it was almost 8 o'clock. They were both shivering from the cold, their clothes plastered to their bodies. But when he told her to try starting the car, the engine turned over smoothly, purring like nothing had ever been wrong. The relief on her face was something Daniel wouldn't forget anytime soon. Thank you, she said. Seriously. Thank you so much. What do I owe you? Daniel mentally calculated the time and parts. $60 for the parts and let's say $40 for the labor. So $100 total, she stared at him. $100? That's it? You worked for almost 2 hours in the rain. He shrugged. It wasn't that complicated once I found the problem. And honestly, I didn't have to use much except some cleaning solution and sealant. That's not the point. Your time is worth something. $100 is fair, Daniel said firmly. I'm not going to overcharge you just because you drive a nice car. She looked at him like she was trying to figure out if he was real. Then she pulled out her wallet and handed him $200 bills. Keep the change, please, you earned it. You can and you will. You saved me from missing a meeting I can probably reschedule, and more importantly, you didn't give up when it would have been easier to just send me away. That's worth more than $100. Daniel took the money because arguing seemed pointless and because honestly they needed it. The electric bill was due next week. She held out her hand. I'm Elena Rodriguez, he shook it. Daniel Chen, this is my dad's shop. Well, Daniel Chen, do you have a business card? He almost laughed. Business cards. Like they were some fancy operation. But he went inside and came back with one of the worn cards they'd had printed 5 years ago. The edges were bent and the phone number was slightly faded, but it had the shop's name and number. Elena took it carefully, like it was something precious, and tucked it into her purse. I'm serious about this, Daniel. You do good work and you're honest. That's rare. If I need anything else, I'm calling you. We're usually open Monday through Saturday 8 to 6, he said. She nodded, then hesitated. Can I ask you something else? Why is the shop struggling? Because I saw those bills on your desk through the window and I know that look. I've had that look plenty of times in my life. Daniel wasn't sure why he answered honestly. Maybe because she'd stood in the rain with him for 2 hours. Maybe because there was something in her eyes that said she'd understand. Big shops with fancy equipment and corporate contracts get all the business these days, he said. We're just a small neighborhood place. People go where they see the ads, where they feel like they're getting the best deal. Hard to compete when you can't afford to advertise and you're still using equipment from 20 years ago. Elena nodded slowly. I understand that more than you know. But here's what I've learned. Quality always matters. Always. People might go for the flashy option at first, but eventually they figure out who actually cares about doing the job right. She opened her car door. Don't give up on this place, Daniel. Something tells me it's more important than you realize. Then she got in her car and drove away, her taillights disappearing into the rainy night. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching her go. Then he looked down at the $200 in his hand and allowed himself a small smile. Maybe his mom had been right. Maybe treating people right when it was inconvenient really did matter. He went back inside, dripping water all over the concrete floor. The shop suddenly felt quieter, emptier. He looked around at the familiar space, the old equipment his dad had maintained for decades, the walls covered with faded calendars and tool charts. There was a coffee maker in the corner that only worked if you jiggled the plug just right. A space heater that his mom had bought at a yard sale 15 years ago. Photos on the wall from better times, when his parents had first opened the shop. Both of them young and smiling, full of hope. His dad would be in bed by now, probably watching old westerns on the television. The same ones he'd seen 100 times. Since Mom died, his dad didn't sleep much. Just dozed in his chair, woke up confused, watched more television. Daniel worried about him constantly. Worried that the stress of keeping the shop running was too much. Worried that one day he'd come in and find his dad had just given up. The $200 would help. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would help. Every little bit helped these days. Daniel turned off the lights, set the alarm, and locked up the shop. The rain had finally started to ease up, turning from a downpour to a steady drizzle. As he drove home in his old pickup truck, he thought about Elena Rodriguez and her expensive car and her important meeting. He thought about the way she'd stood in the rain, holding the flashlight without complaining. The way she'd asked real questions, wanted real answers. The way she'd looked at their old shop like she saw something there worth saving. He figured he'd never see her again. People like her didn't usually come back to places like his dad's shop. They got their car fixed, said thank you, and went back to their world of business deals and important meetings. That was just how things worked. He had no idea how wrong he was. He had no idea that in 3 days his phone would ring with an opportunity that would change everything. That would test everything he thought he knew about business, about success, about what was possible for someone like him. But that night, driving through the rain, the streets empty and slick with water, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, he was just happy to have helped someone. His hands still smelled like engine oil and electrical cleaner. His clothes were still damp, cold against his skin. His back ached from bending over the engine for so long, and none of it mattered, because for 2 hours he'd done what his mom had taught him. He'd helped someone who needed help even when it was hard, even when it was inconvenient. He'd refused to give up just because the problem wasn't obvious. He'd used everything his father had taught him about cars and everything his mother had taught him about people. Sometimes that has to be enough. Sometimes doing the right thing just because it's right has to be its own reward. Sometimes treating someone with kindness and respect, regardless of who they are or what they drive or how much money they have, matters more than anything else. Sometimes. That's everything. What Daniel didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Elena Rodriguez didn't make it to her meeting that night. But the next morning she rescheduled it, and she crushed it, landed the deal. 6 months of work paying off in one morning. And the whole time, sitting in that boardroom with men in expensive suits, she kept thinking about a young man who'd worked in the rain for 2 hours to help a stranger, who'd refused to overcharge her, who'd treated her car like it mattered and treated her like she mattered, without knowing who she was or what she did. She kept thinking about his hands, rough and stained with oil that probably never washed out, about his eyes, tired but kind, about the way he'd explained everything patiently, like her understanding actually mattered, about the bills she'd seen on that desk, and the look she recognized because she'd worn that same look for years. She kept thinking about Chen's auto repair, and about Daniel Chen, and about a conversation she'd had once with her mentor, years ago, the man who'd given her her first real chance when she was nobody. When she was just a kid from the poor side of town with big dreams and no money, he'd told her, "When you make it, when you climb out and reach the top, don't forget to throw the rope back down. Don't forget what it was like at the bottom. And when you see someone working hard, someone with integrity, someone who deserves a chance but just hasn't caught a break yet, you give them that chance because someone gave it to you." And that's how we change things, one chance at a time. Elena had never forgotten those words, and now, looking at Daniel Chen's worn business card sitting on her desk, she knew exactly what she was going to do. She was going to make a phone call that would change everything. 3 days passed like they always did. Daniel woke up early, made breakfast for his dad, drove to the shop, worked on whatever cars came in. An old Honda with a bad transmission, a pickup truck that needed new brakes, a minivan with a check engine light that turned out to be just a loose gas cap. Nothing special. Nothing different. Just the regular rhythm of trying to keep a struggling business alive one day at a time. His dad had been in better spirits lately. The $200 from Elena's repair had helped, and they'd managed to pay the electric bill on time for once. Small victories. That's what life was made of these days. Small victories that kept you going until the next problem showed up. It was Wednesday afternoon, sometime around 2 o'clock when the phone rang. Daniel was under a Chevy, changing the oil, and almost didn't hear it. But something made him slide out and wipe his hands on a rag before picking up. "Chen's auto repair," he said, tucking the phone between his ear and shoulder while he tried to get the oil stains off his fingers. "Is this Daniel Chen?" A woman's voice, professional, familiar. "Yeah, this is Daniel." "Who's this?" "It's Elena Rodriguez." "From the other night?" "The car in the rain?" Daniel stood up straighter, surprised. "Oh, hey, yeah, of course I remember. Is everything okay with your car?" "The car's running perfectly, thanks to you. Actually, I'm calling about something else. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" He looked around the empty shop. The Chevy could wait. Everything could wait. "Sure, what's up?" "I have a business proposition for you," Elena said. "But it's complicated and I'd rather discuss it in person. Are you free tomorrow morning? Say 9 o'clock? I can come to your shop." Daniel's mind raced. A business proposition? From a woman who drove a car worth more than their entire year's revenue? "Yeah, I can do 9 o'clock. Can you give me a hint what this is about?" There was a pause. Then Elena said, "Let's just say I was very impressed with your work and I think there might be an opportunity for us to help each other. I'll explain everything tomorrow." After they hung up, Daniel stood there holding the phone, trying to figure out what just happened. His dad shuffled in from the back office, moving slowly like he always did these days ever since the grief had settled into his bones. "Who was that?" his father asked in Mandarin. They usually spoke Chinese at home and in the shop, switching to English only when customers were around. "You remember that woman from Tuesday night? The one with the expensive car?" His dad nodded. "The one who paid double?" "Yeah, she wants to meet tomorrow. Says she has a business proposition." His father's face turned cautious. William Chen had been running the shop for 30 years, and he'd learned to be suspicious of things that sounded too good. "What kind of proposition?" She didn't say, just that she wants to talk in person. "Be careful," his dad said. "Sometimes people like that, they want something. They make promises they don't keep." Daniel nodded, but something in his gut told him Elena wasn't like that. The way she'd stood in the rain with him asking real questions. The way she'd looked at the shop like she understood what it meant to struggle. Maybe he was being naive, but he didn't think she was going to waste his time. That night he barely slept. His mind kept spinning through possibilities. Maybe she wanted to hire them as her personal mechanic? Maybe she knew other rich people who needed car work. Maybe this was nothing. Just a question about her car and he was building it up into something bigger than it was? By the time 9 o'clock rolled around the next morning, Daniel had cleaned the shop better than he had in months. Swept the floors, organized the tools, even wiped down the waiting area chairs that nobody ever sat in. His dad watched all this with raised eyebrows but didn't say anything. Elena arrived exactly at 9, driving the same black sedan he'd fixed. But this time she wasn't wearing a soaked business suit. She was dressed more casually, nice pants and a blouse, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked around the shop with the same careful attention she'd paid to her engine, taking everything in. "Good morning," she said, shaking Daniel's hand. "Thank you for making time." "Of course. You want some coffee?" "Fair warning, our coffee maker is terrible." She smiled. "I'll take my chances." They sat in the small office at the desk where Daniel had been sorting bills 3 nights ago. His dad had conveniently found something to do in the garage, giving them privacy but probably listening to every word. Elena pulled a folder from her briefcase and set it on the desk. "I'm going to be direct with you, Daniel, because I think you're someone who appreciates directness. I'm the CEO of a company called Tech Vision Industries. We're a mid-sized tech firm, about 800 employees, and we operate a corporate fleet of just over 200 vehicles." Daniel nodded, trying not to show how intimidated he suddenly felt. 200 vehicles? "Currently," Elena continued, "we contract with a large automotive service chain for our fleet maintenance. They're fine, professional, corporate, but here's the thing. They're expensive, they're impersonal, and frankly, I don't trust that they actually care about doing quality work. I think they care about billing hours and moving cars through their system as fast as possible." She opened the folder and showed him some papers. Numbers. Lots of numbers. "Last year, we spent almost $400,000 on vehicle maintenance. That's not counting the cost of vehicles being out of service, which affects our operations. When I looked at the actual work being done, I realized we were paying for a lot of things that probably didn't need to be done. Unnecessary repairs, inflated parts costs, that kind of thing." Daniel looked at the numbers, his mind struggling to process them. $400,000. That was more than he could even imagine. "The other night," Elena said, "you fixed my car for $100. Another shop would have charged me $300, maybe $400. Not because the work was worth that much, but because they could. Because I was desperate and stranded and they knew it. But you didn't do that. You charged me fairly for actual work done." She leaned forward. "So here's my proposition. I want Chen's Auto Repair to become the exclusive maintenance provider for Tech Vision's corporate fleet." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. He just stared at her, convinced he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" 214 vehicles, Elena said. "Regular maintenance, repairs, everything. I'm willing to offer you a contract that would guarantee you steady work and fair compensation. Based on my calculations, it would be worth somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 annually to your business." The number hit Daniel like a physical thing. $200,000. In 1 year. They made maybe $60,000 in a good year now, and most years weren't good. That's... He couldn't finish the sentence. His mind was racing too fast. "That's not possible." "Why not?" "Because look at this place." Daniel gestured around the small shop. "We've got 2 bays, equipment from the 90s, just me and my dad. We couldn't handle 200 cars. We can barely handle the dozen or so we get in a week." "I know," Elena said calmly. "That's why the contract comes with conditions. You'd need to expand, hire mechanics, upgrade your equipment, meet certain safety and quality standards. I'm not asking you to stay as you are. I'm asking if you're willing to grow." Daniel's head was spinning. "How much would that cost?" "The expansion?" "I had my people run some numbers." She showed him another page. "Somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000. New equipment, renovations, hiring costs, training. It's a significant investment." "We don't have that kind of money," Daniel said quietly. "We barely have enough to make it through next month." "I know. That's why I'm prepared to offer you a small business loan through Tech Vision. $80,000 at 3% interest, to be paid back over 5 years through deductions from your monthly service fees. The numbers still work out heavily in your favor." She showed him a spreadsheet. "Even after the loan payments, even after hiring new people and operating costs, Chen's Auto Repair would be making more than double what they made now. Maybe triple. It was too good to be true." "It had to be. Why?" Daniel asked. "Why would you do this? You could hire any shop in the city. Bigger shops. Shops with more experience." Elena sat back in her chair. "Can I tell you something personal?" "Sure. My parents were janitors. Both of them. They came to this country with nothing and worked 3 jobs between them to keep food on the table. When I was 16, I got a job at a grocery store and I was terrible at it. Slow, clumsy, kept making mistakes. The manager should have fired me in the first week." She paused, her eyes distant. "But he didn't. Instead, he took extra time to train me. Believed I could do better. Gave me chances I didn't deserve yet. And eventually I figured it out. Got good at it. That manager's name was Mr. Patterson, and I will never forget what he did for me. He saw potential instead of problems. Elena looked directly at Daniel. The other night in the rain, I saw someone who reminded me of myself at that age. Someone smart, hardworking, honest. Someone who just needs a real chance. And I made a promise to myself years ago that if I ever got to a position where I could give someone that chance, I would. Daniel felt something tight in his chest. His mom's words echoed in his head. How you treat people when it's inconvenient says more about you than how you treat them when it's easy. There's another reason too, Elena added. I genuinely believe you'll do better work than the corporate chain. I believe you'll care about these vehicles like they matter, because that's who you are. And in the long run, that's better for my company. So yes, I'm taking a chance on you, but you're also solving a real problem for me.
This isn't charity.
It's business. Good business. Daniel looked down at the papers spread across the desk. The numbers, the contracts, the possibility of everything changing. I need to talk to my dad, he said finally. Of course, take whatever time you need, but I do need an answer by Monday. If you say no, I need to make other arrangements. After Elena left, Daniel sat in the office for a long time, just staring at the papers. His dad came in eventually, moving slowly, lowering himself into the other chair with a soft grunt. You heard all that? Daniel asked in Mandarin. Most of it. My English isn't as bad as I pretend. His father looked at the papers without touching them. What do you think? I think it's everything we need. Everything we've been praying for. But I'm scared. Scared of what? What if we fail? What if we take her money, try to expand and can't handle it? What if we lose everything? His father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, When your mother and I started this shop, we had nothing. Just tools, dreams, and fear. So much fear. Fear of failing. Fear of looking stupid. Fear of losing everything. But you know what your mother said to me? Daniel shook his head. She said fear is just a sign that something matters. If you're not scared, you don't care enough. The question isn't whether you're afraid. The question is whether the dream is bigger than the fear. William Chen reached out and put his hand on his son's shoulder, something he rarely did anymore. You gave up your dreams to help me when your mother died. I see that. I know what it cost you. Maybe this is the universe giving you a chance at a new dream, a bigger dream. What if I mess it up? Then you mess it up. But at least you tried. At least you didn't spend the rest of your life wondering what if. His father's eyes were wet. Your mother would tell you to take this chance. She would tell you to be brave, and she would be so proud of you, no matter what happens. That did it. Daniel felt tears running down his face, the weight of 3 years of grief and stress and fear finally breaking through. His dad pulled him close, and they held each other in that small office, surrounded by old bills and broken dreams and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. That weekend, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He made a real plan. Not just surviving day to day, but actually planning for a future. He researched equipment costs, made lists of what they'd need, looked into hiring skilled mechanics. He worked through the numbers a dozen times, checking Elena's math, making sure it actually made sense. And every time it did, the numbers worked. The opportunity was real. Monday morning, Daniel called Elena before he could talk himself out of it. Chen's Auto Repair, he said when she answered, his voice steady despite his racing heart. We'd like to accept your offer, all of it. The contract, the loan, everything. We're in. There was a pause. Then Elena's voice came back and he could hear the smile in it. I'm glad, Daniel. Really glad. I'll have the contracts drawn up this week. We'll set up a timeline for the expansion. This is going to work. I know it is. I hope you're right. I am, trust me. I've been doing this long enough to know when something is going to work. You've got what it matters. The skill, the integrity, the work ethic. Everything else we can build. After they hung up, Daniel walked out into the garage where his dad was organizing tools. We did it, he said in Mandarin. We said yes. His father nodded slowly, then did something Daniel hadn't seen in 3 years. He smiled, really smiled. Then we better get to work. We've got a business to build. And for the first time since his mother died, Daniel felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real hope. The kind that makes you believe tomorrow might actually be better than today. He had no idea how hard the next 60 days would be. No idea of the challenges waiting around the corner. But in that moment, standing in his father's shop with sunlight streaming through the dusty windows, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Sometimes that's all you need to start. Just enough belief to take the first step. The next 60 days were the hardest of Daniel's life. And that was saying something considering he'd already lived through his mother's death and 3 years of barely keeping the shop alive. The contractor showed up on a Tuesday morning, a week after he'd signed Elena's contract. They walked through the shop with clipboards and measuring tapes, pointing at things that needed to be fixed, upgraded, replaced. The list kept growing. New lifts, updated electrical systems, a proper computer system for tracking work orders, an expansion of the second bay, fresh paint, better lighting, safety equipment that met current codes. Every day brought a new problem. The permits took longer than expected. The equipment they'd ordered was back-ordered. The contractor found issues with the foundation that needed addressing before they could install the new lifts. Each problem ate up time and money, and Daniel felt the pressure building like water behind a dam. But he kept going. What choice did he have? He'd made a promise to Elena, signed a contract, taken her money. There was no going back now. The hiring process was its own nightmare. Daniel had never interviewed anyone in his life, never been responsible for someone else's livelihood. The first few interviews were disasters. He asked the wrong questions, talked too much when he should have listened, made promises he wasn't sure he could keep. One guy walked out in the middle of the interview when he saw the old equipment. Another laughed when Daniel explained the salary range, saying he could make more at any corporate chain. A third seemed perfect until Daniel checked his references and found out he'd been fired from his last 3 jobs for showing up drunk. Daniel sat across from mechanics who had more experience than him, who looked at the small shop with obvious skepticism, who asked questions he didn't know how to answer. How many vacation days? What's the healthcare package like? What are the advancement opportunities? What's the retirement plan? He felt like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes, pretending to be a real business owner. Some nights he'd go home and just lie awake, wondering if he was in over his head. His father would hear him pacing and would shuffle out of his room, making tea without saying anything, just sitting with Daniel until the anxiety passed. But slowly, painfully, Daniel figured it out. Elena helped him write better job descriptions, taught him what questions to ask, showed him how to read between the lines when candidates talked about their experience. He interviewed 17 people before making his first hire. He hired 3 mechanics. 2 were older guys named Frank and Jose, who'd been laid off from bigger shops and just wanted steady work. They'd been friends for 20 years, worked together at 3 different places, and came as a package deal. They had the experience Daniel lacked, the steady hands and deep knowledge that only came from decades of work. The third was a woman named Rita Chen, no relation. She was younger than Daniel, 22, fresh out of technical school where she'd graduated top of her class, but she couldn't get hired anywhere because she was a woman in a male-dominated field. Every shop either turned her down immediately or made uncomfortable comments that made her walk away. "I'll work twice as hard as anyone else," Rita told him during the interview. Her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "I know I have to prove myself more than a guy would. That's fine. I just need someone to give me a chance." Daniel saw something in her eyes, a hunger and determination that he recognized. "Can you start Monday?" he asked. Rita's eyes went wide. "Seriously? You're not going to call my references first? Ask me to demonstrate something? Most places make me take these elaborate tests to prove I actually know what I'm doing." "Do you know what you're doing?" "Yes." "Then I believe you. Welcome to the team." Daniel hired her on the spot. He knew exactly what it felt like to need a chance, to have someone believe in you when nobody else would. Elena came by every week to check on their progress. At first, Daniel dreaded these visits. He felt like a student being graded, like he was constantly falling short. But gradually he realized Elena wasn't there to judge him. She was there to help. She'd walk through the shop, ask questions, offer suggestions. She knew things about running a business that Daniel had never even considered. How to create efficient work schedules, how to track inventory, how to handle customer complaints, how to negotiate with suppliers. "You're doing great," she told him one afternoon about 3 weeks into the renovation. They were standing in what would become the expanded second bay, surrounded by construction dust and the smell of fresh concrete. "It doesn't feel like it," Daniel admitted. "Every day something goes wrong. We're behind schedule, over budget. I keep thinking I made a huge mistake. Elena smiled. You know what I was doing 3 weeks into my first real management position? I was hiding in the bathroom crying because I'd just screwed up a presentation in front of the entire executive team. Thought I was going to get fired for sure. Daniel looked at her, surprised. It was hard to imagine Elena, always so confident and put together, hiding in a bathroom crying. What happened? He asked. My boss pulled me aside afterward. I thought he was going to let me go. Instead, he told me that everyone messes up. The only difference between people who succeed and people who fail is that successful people keep going after they mess up. They learn. They adapt. They don't give up. She put her hand on his shoulder. You're going to make mistakes, Daniel. Lots of them. I'm going to make mistakes too. This is new for both of us, but we're going to figure it out together, okay? You're not alone in this. Something about the way she said it made Daniel feel like he could breathe again. Like maybe it was okay that he didn't have all the answers. Like maybe trying was enough. They started having coffee together every week, usually early in the morning before the shop got busy. They'd sit in that small office with the terrible coffee maker, and Elena would teach him things. How to read profit and loss statements. How to project cash flow. How to motivate employees. How to handle the pressure of running a business. But they talked about other things too. Personal things. Elena told him about her divorce, about the husband who'd resented her success, who'd wanted her to be smaller so he could feel bigger. About the loneliness of being at the top, of having money and power but no one to share it with. Daniel told her about his mother, about the last conversation they'd had before she died. She'd been in the hospital, weak but still trying to be strong for him. Take care of your father, she'd said. But don't forget to take care of yourself too. Don't let grief steal your life. He'd tried to keep that promise, but grief had stolen 3 years anyway. Only now, finally, did he feel like he was getting his life back. Do you ever wonder what she'd think? Elena asked one morning. Your mom. About all this, Daniel smiled. Every day. I think she'd be proud. Terrified, but proud. She always believed in taking chances and helping people. That's what this feels like. Like I'm finally living the way she taught me to live. Their friendship was becoming something neither of them had expected. There was an ease between them, a comfort. They could sit in silence without it being awkward. They could disagree without it becoming an argument. They understood each other in a way that felt rare and valuable, but people started to notice. At TechVision, Elena's executive team began asking questions. Why was she spending so much time at some small auto shop? Why had she given such a generous contract to an unknown business? Was there something going on that they should know about? The questions were always polite, always professional, but the implication was clear. They thought she was making decisions based on personal feelings rather than business sense. In a board meeting 6 weeks into the renovation, a man named Victor Huang brought it up directly. Victor was the chief operating officer, ambitious and always positioning himself as Elena's rival. I'm concerned about this auto shop arrangement, Victor said, his voice smooth and reasonable. We've invested significant resources in an unproven business. What happens if they can't deliver? Have we done proper due diligence? Elena kept her face neutral. Chen's Auto Repair is meeting every benchmark we set. They're on track to be fully operational in 2 weeks. I'm confident they'll exceed our expectations. But you're there several times a week, another board member pointed out. Is that really necessary? It seems like an unusual amount of personal attention for a simple vendor relationship. Elena felt her jaw tighten. I'm ensuring our investment is protected and that the transition goes smoothly. That's my job as CEO. Victor leaned back in his chair. Of course. I'm just saying we need to be careful about appearances. We don't want anyone to think decisions are being made for personal, rather than professional reasons. The implication hung in the air. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself and Daniel. But she couldn't, not without making it worse. So she just nodded and moved on to the next agenda item. But the damage was done. The whispers started. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own challenges. The other shop owners in the neighborhood weren't happy about Chen's Auto Repair suddenly expanding. They saw it as unfair competition, as some kind of special treatment. One afternoon, an old friend from high school showed up at the shop. Tommy Chen, no relation despite the same last name. They'd been close once before Daniel had dropped out of college. Heard you landed some big corporate contract, Tommy said, looking around at the construction. He'd done well for himself. Worked as an engineer at one of those tech companies Daniel used to dream about joining. Yeah, we got lucky, Daniel said carefully. Lucky? Tommy laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. Come on, man. Everyone knows what's really going on. That CEO woman is coming around here all the time. You're telling me this is all just business? Daniel felt his face flush. It is just business. She needed a reliable mechanic. We needed the work. That's it. Right, and I'm sure it has nothing to do with her being attracted to the whole struggling mechanic thing. The noble poor guy working with his hands. That's like catnip for rich women looking for a project. Get out, Daniel said quietly. What? Get out of my shop now! Tommy held up his hands in mock surrender. Fine. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. Don't shoot the messenger. He headed toward the door, then turned back. You know the worst part? You actually think you earned this. That's sad, man. After Tommy left, Daniel stood there shaking with anger and shame, because part of him wondered if Tommy was right. Had he earned this opportunity? Or was he just Elena's charity case, her good deed that made her feel better about herself? Rita found him later, sitting alone in the office, staring at nothing. You okay, boss? She asked. Daniel almost laughed at being called boss. Yeah, just a rough day. Rita sat down across from him. Can I tell you something? Before you hired me, I applied to 47 shops. 47. You want to know how many even bothered to interview me? 3. And all 3 of them asked if I was sure I could handle the physical work, if I really understood cars, if I was just doing this to meet guys. She leaned forward. The thing is, people are always going to have opinions about why you succeeded. If you're a woman, they say you slept your way there. If you're young, they say it was nepotism. If you got help, they say you didn't earn it. There's always going to be someone ready to tell you that you don't deserve what you have. So what do? Daniel asked. You prove them wrong. You work harder than anyone else. You deliver results, and you stop worrying about what people think. Because here's the truth. People who criticize are usually people who never had the courage to try. Daniel nodded slowly. Rita was right. He knew she was right. But it still hurt. That evening, Elena called him. Can we talk? Not about business, just talk. They met at a small diner near the shop, the kind of place with worn booths and coffee that was somehow worse than their terrible office machine. It was neutral territory, away from Tech Vision and away from the shop. I heard some things today, Elena said after they'd ordered, about us. People are talking. Yeah, I heard some things too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elena said, are we making a mistake? This partnership, this friendship, is it causing more problems than it's solving? Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. About Tommy's accusations and Victor's implications and all the whispers that seemed to follow them both now. I don't think so, he said finally. I think people are just uncomfortable because we don't fit into their neat little boxes. You're supposed to stay in your CEO world, and I'm supposed to stay in mine. The fact that we're crossing those lines makes people nervous. But maybe they have a point, Elena said. Maybe I am being unprofessional. Maybe I am giving you special treatment. Are you? Daniel asked. Are you doing this because you feel sorry for me? Or because you think I can actually do the work? Elena met his eyes. You can do the work. I've never doubted that. Then that's all that matters. We don't owe anyone explanations. We don't have to justify our friendship or our business relationship to people who don't understand it. Elena smiled, but it was sad. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. When they left the diner, Elena turned to him. Thank you, Daniel, for believing in this, for believing in us. Thank you for giving me the chance, he replied. They went their separate ways, back to their separate worlds, but both of them knew something had shifted. The pressure was building from all sides. The question wasn't whether they could survive it. The question was whether they'd still be standing when everything came crashing down, because it was going to crash. That much was certain. The whispers were getting louder. The criticism was getting sharper. And somewhere in the shadows, people like Victor Huang were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The 60-day deadline was approaching. In 1 week, Chen's Auto Repair would officially take over Tech Vision's fleet maintenance. Everything Daniel and his father had worked for, everything Elena had risked her reputation for would finally be put to the test. Daniel drove home that night through empty streets, the city quiet around him. He thought about his mother, about her belief in taking chances, about his father's words. Fear is just a sign that something matters. This mattered. It mattered more than anything had mattered in a long time. Whatever happened next, whatever storms were coming, he was ready. Or at least he was as ready as he'd ever be. Sometimes that has to be enough. The grand opening of the newly expanded Chen's Auto Repair happened on a Saturday morning. Daniel had worked until 3 in the morning making sure everything was perfect. The new bays gleamed under LED lighting. The equipment was state-of-the-art. The waiting area had comfortable chairs and a coffee machine that actually worked. It looked like a real business now, not just a struggling shop held together by hope and duct tape. His father stood beside him as the sun came up, looking around with tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud," he said in Mandarin. "I wish she could see this." "I think she can," Daniel replied. Elena arrived at 8 bringing breakfast for everyone. She'd invited a few people from Tech Vision to see the facility, to show them that their investment was solid. Daniel's new employees were there too. Frank and Jose were joking around near the coffee machine. Rita was checking over the diagnostic equipment, still amazed that she got to work with tools this nice. Everything felt perfect, like all the hard work and stress and doubt had been worth it. Like they'd actually pulled off something impossible. Daniel should have known it wouldn't last. The first sign of trouble came Monday morning. Elena called at 7 and Daniel could hear the tension in her voice immediately. "We need to talk. In person. Can you come to my office?" "When?" "Now, please." The drive to Tech Vision headquarters took 20 minutes. Daniel had never been there before. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place where everyone wore expensive suits and carried laptops. He felt out of place in his work clothes, with oil still under his fingernails no matter how hard he'd scrubbed. Elena's office was on the 10th floor. Her assistant barely looked at him as she waved him through. Elena was standing by the window looking out at the city and she didn't turn around when he came in. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked. She turned and he saw something in her face that scared him. It wasn't just worry. It was fear. "Someone leaked photos to the board," she said quietly. "Of us at the diner last week, at the shop during the renovation, having coffee in the office, taken from angles that make it look like we're more than just business partners." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "What? Who would do that?" "Victor Huang, it has to be. He's been positioning himself to take my job for months, and this is exactly the kind of thing he'd use." Elena sat down heavily in her chair. "The board called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They want to discuss the Chen's Auto Repair contract and my unprofessional conduct." "But we haven't done anything wrong," Daniel said. "We're friends. We work together. That's it."